Call the meeting to order. And take the call, please. Roll, please.
Okay, when your name is called, please answer with here or present. Member Denny?
Here.
Member Frost?
Here.
Member Orlando?
Here.
Member Wyatt?
Here.
Member Muller?
Here.
For the record, all members of the Financial Review Committee are present.
Any public comments?
We have no public comments at this time.
I'll close the public comments. Brings us to new business approval of meetings for May 22nd, 2019. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the minutes as
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
aye.
And I guess
I'll
there's a
abstain.
refusal.
Yeah.
I will call around.
Okay.
So Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Frost?
Abstain.
Member Miller?
Aye.
Member Wyatt?
Aye.
Member Denny?
Aye.
So by this motion passes by a vote of 4-1 with Member Frost abstaining.
Is that a 4-1 vote?
4-1.
4-0.
4-0-1.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us down to quarterly financial report ending June 30th, 2019. Do we have a staff report on that?
Yes, we do. So we went to City Council a couple weeks ago, quarterly report. I'm going to go ahead and hand out the PowerPoint presentation that I did that night. I'm going to walk fairly quickly through because I know that Chair, Vice Chair, Mr. Denny, and my staff have all heard this, but I'll go ahead and kind of quickly go through the recap for last year, and also include some minor revisions that we've had since the audit, but just really quick. Revenues and expenses both came in positive directions. Hotel taxes continue to show stellar performance. And we had expected some tail off in the spring that did not occur. The summer, also I'm going to bring this forward also in the next agenda item. The summer has shown a strong performance by our hotels, and I'll get into that actually in the next report. But so we finished last year really strong, up over $500,000. Better than budget. Charges for services and license and permits relate to development activity in town. Both of those continue to show strong performance. We have been saying for a couple of years that at some point we expect it to tail off, so we still do budget conservatively. I'm going to bring it forward in the next agenda item. First quarter of this year continues the strong performance, so we're looking pretty good on our budget for this year as well. Investment income, strong performance last year. The local agency investment fund, which we have over half of our portfolio invested in, went from about 1.85% earnings at the beginning of the year and grew to over 2.5%. We also still budget those conservatively based on we might write big checks at any given time. So it's nice to get a little slug in the arm and not take a hit on investment performance. Sales tax ended up actually being a surprise in our last payments that we got in August that we accrue back to last year. It's still I've been saying this for 2 years now, or a year and a half. It's harder to predict sales tax now than it ever has been, given the state's new software system. At the beginning of fiscal year 19, so it would have been the first quarter of last year, we saw some corrections from the prior year that we got additional allocations. It looks like based on the sales taxes that Robin just booked in the last day or two, I looked them up this morning, that it's gone back to what I might consider a normalized level of sales taxes, so we're not seeing as many corrections at this point in time, but last year was really hard to predict, and again, the last quarter was surprising. Operating expenditures, professional services last year were higher. A lot of that's obviously, it has to do with a lot of our building activity. We do contract out for plan reviews, a lot of building inspection work, but we also, for 6-7 months last year, we had a contract building official while we went through two recruitments three recruitments for building official. We finally got one that started a couple weeks ago, so those contract costs will reduce going forward this year. But we did experience higher costs last year. Personnel costs have shown positive variances for us as we transitioned in reorganizations we've been doing, some retirements, or a retirement, but also some folks that have left for greener pastures and or moved out of state. Our hiring has been fairly, in total, the employees we're getting in are lower than what we have budgeted as far as the pay. We've also been fairly lucky at finding folks, not intentionally, that fall into the new pension plan that's lower. There's about a 5% savings there. Anyway, so last year finished positive. In closing out last year's books, the council approved new financial policies. We've converted to the new reserve policies. We saw transfers out last year to the CIP fund for both the Doheny Village Improvement Account and a Community Investment Account, as well as a new normal, regularly budgeted, fully budgeted capital program. And in the rollover, we also set aside $1 million for a general plan update. We closed out last fiscal year with $5 million in a set aside in a unfunded liability account. So everything is looking good at this point in time. I'm all the way on slide 6 if you're interested. In the rollover report in September, we did transfer an additional $1.4 million to the community investment account, bringing it up to $5 million. We did a lot money for a emergency storm drain project that's been completed. I haven't seen the final paperwork from Matt Sinacori yet, but it's not completed.
It's not complete.
Okay, it looks completed to me.
Not on the plaza.
What's that?
Not
On the beach.
plaza and Violet. Oh, that project. Sorry.
All the sand
When you
cubes.
said storm drain, I was
yeah.
thinking about the curbs and gutters we're doing right now. Sorry.
It's all right. And rolling through, the rest of it are fairly minor items. We did clean up what was playing out to be a problem with our gas tax funds. We were able to reconfigure the allocation that kept the general fund whole, capital projects fund whole, and we don't have an audit issue by just using the money differently. So in a nutshell, if we use gas tax money to do road maintenance work, our operating type maintenance, like painting or striping streets, curbs, doing street light work, street sweeping, if we use it in that manner, then there's a maintenance of effort, a city investment that has to go into those same types of things at a certain level. But if we use that same money on capital projects like repaving streets, slurry sealing streets, then we don't have the same level of effort. So we've got a fully funded operating program the way it is. So we just redirected what had traditionally been a gas tax allocation to the general fund. We reduced the gas tax and instead sent it to the capital program and reduce the general fund's transfer to the capital program in a like amount. So all the funds are full. We're still have everything fully funded. I don't have an on-paper audit issue. So that was the description of the bottom, or the bullet bottom page 6. So again, FY19 finished strong. We've got the FY20 budget in place with all the new reserve accounts, and I don't know if there's any questions regarding finishing FY19. So that's a receiving file.
Okay, any questions?
And the fourth quarter of 2019.
Oh, I forgot to mention the audit adjustment.
You had provided us this, what is it called, a management discussion?
Yes.
And it says that the landscape and maintenance was, and the liability insurance premiums and storm drains were all down by, one, two, three, four, about 400,000.
Mhm.
Are those costs gonna be incurred next quarter?
It wasn't a timing difference, I don't believe.
It wasn't a time difference, it's just the ultimate cost was just
Yeah,
lower.
in the case of landscaping maintenance, we're gonna see that go up and down by those 100 to 200,000 in a given year, just depending on whether or not we do a major refurbishment of an area or something. In the case of liability insurance, we had seen, we'd received a credit that our insurer does a true up. It's kind of a 3-year rolling true up that they had been doing. We changed the methodology, but we saw a credit, one-time credit. But even then, I've always budgeted what I expect it to be, and we happen to get a credit. And then storm drains is, we have regular maintenance of storm drains, but then things come up. Like you saw with the Capitol Beach project, that was a big one.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised that it was below budget.
Well, that actual work happened in the first quarter of this year.
Okay.
It was in our rollover report where we adjust this year's budget, but we essentially used surplus from last year to pay for it.
Okay. Thank you.
And I didn't mention that we did have a couple odd adjustments that I addressed in the cover memo for the staff report. One of them relates to a deposit that we take in deposits for development activity, like to make sure folks finish grading. If they were to start grading, we need to make sure we have money or a bond in place, but also to pay for inspection work and so forth. And we inadvertently and didn't set it aside in what we call a trust account. We recognized it as revenue. So Robin caught that in closing the books. We fixed it. It just happened to be subsequent to producing the Q4 reports. We revised it. And we also came across a couple of invoices from a vendor, one vendor, that didn't get processed. And typically with vendors, they're beating you about the head mirrors, but in this case, they didn't.
It was the other way around.
Yeah. So,
Also from that same management discussion report in the TOT revenues,
Uh-huh.
you said that those receipts were higher,
Yes,
but it does not include short-term rentals.
right.
So how much was the short-term rental revenue?
About 800,000.
Okay.
So in our accounting system, we account for the major hotels separate from the short-term rentals.
Where's that on the budget?
It's the next line item down on the detailed revenue sheet. So I'm looking at the general fund revenues, budget versus actual. You will
Okay, I
see
see.
short-term
I'm
rental,
sorry.
and it came in at 813,000.
Perfect.
And we've seen we've seen strong improvement in how much we've collected since the council approved us buying a software package that lets us identify short-term rentals more readily.
Great.
A $30,000 investment that has resulted in solid return. All right, so that concludes this one. Do you need an action to receive and file?
No, it's not an
any other
action.
questions?
All right.
Not a question, just more of a comment. So the idea going forward is that every quarter we'll review quarterly results. And what Mike's got here is, obviously he's got a cover memo on this one that talks about the audit, which that you only see once a year. But we have the narrative, which is the management discussion, as well as the numbers. And then in this case, he's brought the PowerPoint that went to the council. The value that the FRC can bring is any discussion about how this reporting can be improved. So how can we improve how we report our quarterly financials to the public, to the FRC, to the council, to staff, to everyone? I think in general, this represents best practice. So if you look at the quarterlies for all the cities around us, all the cities in Orange County, you're going to see something very similar to this. So we're all kind of doing the same stuff generally. But it doesn't mean that just because we've always done it that way, it doesn't mean we can't do it better. So the opportunity to have an FRC is to look at how we report financials and see what, if anything, we can do better. And it doesn't mean we have to, I'm not putting anybody on the spot because I don't have any ideas about what we can do better today, but we're going to continue to do this on a quarterly basis, just to remind ourselves that we want to look at how to
This, for
continue.
me, was very helpful, and I appreciated that.
The narrative.
Discussion, the narrative, yeah.
Okay. With that,
But it sounds like, Mike, in the future, we do want to separate, when you talk about TOT tax on the revenue side, separate out hotels versus STRs.
I think that that's helpful because, I mean, it's such a hot topic and
Right.
going on right now would be really great for people to understand that
Call it out with another
they can,
sentence.
they can
Yeah.
see it, yeah.
Great.
I did wonder what was involved in plaza rental revenue. What does that mean?
We have a couple of leases here at City Hall,
Oh, okay,
so.
for rental income.
Yeah, the ambulance service, and we've got a couple that pay $1 a year.
The street
Yes.
guys.
The Historical
Society,
Society
okay, all right, that makes
VFW.
sense.
and VFW, and then the county also has an office here.
Well, the state, so Levin's office down there.
Yeah, Levin's office, but again, those are,
That's $1 a year.
Right, yeah, I know.
sort of tend to have a civic center.
Right.
But the ambulance company is,
Okay, that makes sense, thank you.
and honestly, even that one, I wouldn't exactly call that a market rate, because we really do want them here,
Right.
right in the middle of town to dispatch from, as opposed to
Absolutely.
some other place. For sure.
Anything else on that item? We'll go ahead and receive and file it. Move on to item 3. It's a quarterly financial report ending September 30th, 2019.
For-
Killebrew.
For the first quarter of this year, really no remarkable variances. TOT, like I said, hotel taxes continue to impress. We did meet with the new owners of the Monarch Beach Resort last week, and they seem, they're not, hoteliers are very cagey about telling you what their future business looks like, but they seem very positive and excited about what's happening there. The Ritz-Carlton recently sold as well, so we don't know what kind of changes are going to come from that, but we had another great summer. I did have a chance to talk with some of the staff at the Marriott this morning. They're looking at a tough couple months here, given their restaurant. They've had a couple groups cancel when they came in and saw what the condition of the resort was, and they couldn't envision what it was going to look like when it's done in January. So they're looking for a little bit of softening in their numbers, but they're still, I'll say, bullish for the rest of this fiscal year. And they told me that they're putting their plans together for next year, but at this point in time, their thoughts are it's not going to be much different than it's been the last couple of years, which I keep waiting for a little bit of tail off there. Just, knock on wood, not seeing it yet.
Does everyone know what's going to happen at the Marriott with the restaurant? So they brought in a celebrity chef named John Taysar, cooked with Anthony Bourdain, very well known in the chef world. They're putting 100,000-gallon fish tank in. As you walk down the stairs, they've completely blown everything out, and first thing you'll see is this big fish tank, and then there'll be a bar to the left, and then they're kind of opening up the seating. It's going to be called Outer Reef, so it's seafood.
Bigger patio
focused,
Huge
outside.
patio outside. If you haven't been over
But
there.
you're going to see a bunch
It's
of
opening up the view.
kind
It's
of
gonna be
celebrity
fantastic.
chef type stuff happening there.
Right.
So probably
Over
more
$5 million project.
events and
Wow.
stuff in the media and stuff like that. So
They reflagged it too.
they're
It's a
going to.
JW. Well, it hasn't yet. They're going to.
Oh, I
It's
didn't.
gonna be-
Really?
it's gonna be-
Wow, I didn't know
So anyway, TOT at this point is looking good. We ended this year at 13.3 million on the big hotel TOT. And our budget for coming into this year is 12.85 million. So again, trying to anticipate some tail off. Right now, it didn't happen. We're actually up year over year. So the chances of us hitting our budget get better with each month that passes that we're up over the last year. Property tax, we won't get our first payment, our big payment, until the end of December. So we have some indication that we're going to be close to budget, just based on reports that the county gave us back at the beginning of July. Charges for services, are right at the same pace as last year. I want to caution, I know the council members and city manager know that charges for services and license and permits are driven by the development community. Our ability to predict what's going to come in the door is limited. I watch the amount of traffic in the lobby. So it's not something that we can necessarily predict. We know we've got a hotel project that hopefully they'll start doing some work on that site, which would bring in some additional revenue. But
That's the Cannon's location?
No,
No.
the Wave Hotel on PCH at Green Lantern.
By the point.
Yeah, so we'll see. But year over year on charges for services, we're right at the same level. We finished last year at $2.5 million. This year's budget, again, we're kind of expecting at some point development to slow.
And Mike, real quick, on the sales and use tax, are we expecting to see any bump in that after the Wayfair decision? That we'll be able to start collecting off online orders?
We will see some allocation from that. That's going to come down from the state through the county. The extent of which, I don't know. I know that this fiscal year to date, we're off of what I was expecting. So if I were to project from the receipts Robin just booked yesterday, I'd be about $100,000 off of our $5.9 million budget. I got the number right. But again, it's early, and I'm still not confident that I'm going to get consistent numbers from the state as they continue to clean up issues with their new software program and allocations. They continue to find misallocations. So right now, I'm hopeful that we'll hit our budget this year.
Okay.
Again, charges for services and license permits, we're way up. If you look at last year's actual collections for charges for services, we hit $2.5 million last year. I have 1.75 budgeted this year. We're through the first quarter at the same pace, but again, I don't know. Won't put a lot of confidence in a projection there. License and permits were actually up $90K this quarter compared to last year. This year's budget is only $1.5 million. Last year we finished at $2 million. So we're solidly in a good spot there, but still dependent on what development does for the next 9 months or 8 months. But we haven't seen a big slowing. I mean, I razz our staff across the way. I think it was last Friday, late afternoon. There wasn't anybody in there. I go, it looks like everything died. And I go, this has been the craziest week ever. So, no other notable variances. I did mention one of our big costs that we saw in last year's budget was the building official. We filled that position. He's hit the ground running. We are close to being fully staffed up. Or we're recruiting 2 open positions right now.
We're not talking about that anymore.
Well, there's 3 then. Mark made this.
I opened my big mouth and said when we are fully at 100% staff, we're gonna have a pizza party, and then somebody quit. So.
Yeah. Anyway, so staffing wise, we'll have vacancy savings this year.
You guys got to work your staff.
Right.
Trust me, we filled 13 or 14 positions in the last 5 months out of our 62. Wow. So there's been quite a bit of turnover and a lot of staff doing double duty. So much appreciated. We did see some savings from it. So this year's personnel costs we're targeted to come in below budget. Okay. So that's what I have for the first quarter. It's still early in the year when it comes to our finances because we get so much of our money later in the year. So, any questions?
Any questions?
Well, I have a question now that we've been through. So these management discussion reports that we just reviewed, who's the intended audience?
I try and simplify it enough that anybody can kind of read it, try and figure out what the important things are that are the moving parts in our city's budget. It's general in nature. I think certainly targeting the council, you'll hear me in most of my presentations regarding budget and finance talking about these same categories as kind of the drivers.
Yeah. I was just curious. I was talking to Mark a little bit this morning too, in terms of as we work through here and what advice we It tells you about the moving parts, as you said, right? It says, this is where I thought I would be, and I'm a little bit better, I'm a little bit worse, and here's some explanation of that, but it doesn't give you the bigger picture of where are we now, as the implications of that, and that's always been a difficult thing to make really easy to understand to the broader population. So keep looking at ways that we can do things to make it so you can, I guess I would prefer to have fewer discussions in the council meeting about whether we're over or under budget, and whether we're overspending or underspending in various things, by making it, much easier to be able to have a consistent way we report that's much easier to grasp. I haven't quite figured out how we should do that, but
I'm with you. I mean, but when we take large tranches of money, it's different times during the year, trying to show how that happens is very difficult.
Yeah.
It may look like we're behind, but we haven't taken our property tax allocation yet.
yeah, some of those.
And then all of a sudden we're way ahead of what just happened when we start looking at our cash. So
You're gonna kill me. You're not. Nobody would ever ask you to budget quarterly, would they? You're probably gonna kill me. I'm not saying that it's possible,
It's
but
not a best practice.
why not if we know where each one of these hits? That's an honest question. Right?
Sure. I mean, I can tell you, let me just give you an example. Our largest expenditure, our police contract, I can give you that monthly, because they're gonna bill me 1/12, and at the end of the year, sometime in July, after our fiscal year closes, I'll get a credit based on vacancy savings and workers' comp and other factors that come in over time. That's our biggest expense.
Mm-hmm.
Personnel costs, I can also predict that fairly close. We're gonna have vacancies here and there, but we budget at the full amount. When you get into the planning and building stuff that make up so much of our budget right now, that didn't used to, but because of development activity the last 5 years now, predicting even quarterly or half year on that, and one big project comes in and it's you get a big slug of money, but I can't tell you when that's going to happen, and for me to predict it, I'm throwing darts with the blindfold on.
it actually creates more confusion when it happens, right? I mean, we've got a budget for the quarter, and also we just blow it up, and then you have people saying, well, how did you not anticipate that?
Well, and this is something that's been talked about, budgeting monthly or budgeting quarterly, but something that we haven't talked about, Mike, or maybe I mentioned it to you a long time ago and we never got through it, is that when I was at the county, they did reports where you could see, it was not a super complicated formula, but basically they took last year's actuals by month and tried to give you a sense on a percentage basis what this year's actuals could look like, just so you could get a directional sense of it. Now, again, it's not perfect. It's certainly not auditable, right? Because you're making all sorts of assumptions. But that's something we could maybe play with.
I thought your narrative did that. I mean, I was answering his question. If you needed to see it on here, if you're plus or minus.
We could print out a year-over-year comparison. There's a prior year report. I could do that any given month. That'll show last year's actuals to date, revenues and expenses, and this year's actuals to date. I use those when I'm doing the narrative.
Sure.
But we don't print them.
Yeah, I mean, I could add those or even just provide it to the FRC if we find it useful. That's the push of a button. But it's literally what I use when I'm doing my comparisons. But it also, when I'm closing the books, I'm looking at that just to see if something anomalous jumps out at me that I need to go research. It's very common in auditing. Auditing analytics, you're looking at prior actuals to see if something jumps out as being out of the normal. So we could provide that if we find that useful.
I don't think that would be helpful. So I'm less worried. I think your management summary report does a good job of telling us whether or not our revenues are over or under what we anticipated, and telling you, you know, where concerns ought to be on either revenue or expense side, or where, you know, so in terms of budget versus actual, I think that's what this discussion is. Where are we versus actual? So the discussions that we can't see as well are the budget adjustments that come in during the year, and the way they ripple through and get, you know, and reported. The biggest one that we've always grappled with is the carry forward, right? When we carry forward projects that are in or budgeted in a year or multi-year budget. So part of the budget's spent and part of it hasn't yet been spent, right? So it doesn't carry forward on the revenue and expense side because it's not revenue, right? We carry the expense forward, but we don't carry the revenue forward because the revenue has already been recognized. So we're carrying fund balance forward, which doesn't show up as revenue. So you have to get all the way down to the fund balance impact to know where you are. And we usually lose, because of the number of things that make that up, we lose the context of, you know, of where we are. And so the budget always turns upside down at that point. Our expenses always go above revenue as soon as we do the expense carry forward without the revenue carry forward, right? So it always looks like, you know, if you're looking to criticize or know where we are, that's the first opening, right? They keep looking for a way to have a report that basically takes the carry forward amount and sums it in with revenue and a management report that says, okay, this is now the budget and the actuals went up by the, you know, 2 million we carried forward or whatever. So when you're comparing actual versus revenue, or, you know, alternatively, take the carry forward and put it in its own report where, you know, you hold the budget and then you get another fund carry forward above expected and the revenue to offset, and then you total the whole thing, or something where, you know, that doesn't, first of all, simply confuse the picture of where we are, because you know, with the number of funds and everything, it takes some amount of work to see where we are anyway. But anyway, that's one that if we could figure out a more interesting way to do a sort of a management summary of report or something on it, I think it would be helpful. The other thing that is always difficult to see is we have a number of things where we'll go out and we'll up a contract for, you know, help in building planning, right? And it's all revenue offset. So when we approve the budget, it says, well, you know, we're gonna add, we're gonna take this contract, we're gonna open it up for, you know, X number of dollars to be spent on demand, right? Essentially, it's not a fixed amount spent, and the dollars spent will get offset. We will bill them out to the customer, and they'll get offset by revenue, right? Essentially, but we don't have a good way to show in those organizations the amount of revenue offset. I mean, it doesn't happen simultaneously often. So, and because we have to budget it at the time we sign the contract. So if we sign a $2 million contract, that's going to last, you know, until we've had to budget $2 million. But if we only end up using a portion of it and then bring revenue in, we don't have a good way to show that we have offset that. So it wasn't a budget hit to do that.
So when I came to the city,
Yeah.
the interpretation of the municipal code allows the city manager, this was the interpretation that I was never comfortable with, allows the city manager to amend the budget as long as there's no impact to the bottom line. So assuming that the city manager had the authority to contract for building inspection services and plan reviews that are paid for by developers, at the time that they made the payments, they would adjust the revenue budget and the expense budget. The revenue came from the deposits and the expenses were paid by them. The bottom line impact of the general fund was thus budgetarily zero and actual. it never felt right to me to increase the budget. It just never felt right. It wasn't anything I'd seen anywhere else. So we changed to where now the council has to approve any budget changes.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that because.
But I could literally interpret our current municipal code to say the city manager has the authority to increase the revenue budget and the expense budget as long as the bottom line doesn't have an impact.
We would never know where we are. I mean, it's because, I mean, we don't make a lot of adjustments, but during the course of a 12-month period, there's enough adjustments because of the categories and money gets moved from, one budget line to another.
Yeah.
That even when I get the data and I try to reconcile, what changes were made and why were they made, it takes some amount of time to go through and figure out where the money moved around to and where we are, right? So adding more changes than sort of an ad hoc when needed things would make it nearly impossible to do an analysis and know where we are. But we do, on a number of organizations, we bill through to, we do work on behalf of one of our customers, and then we bill it through to them, but it hits us as a budget at the time we open the contract to allow us to contract that work out. It's an expense at the time we spend it, if you will. And it's a revenue coming in at some time, but
you have the budget expense at the time of contract.
Yeah. And then the revenue comes in over a period of time, and we can't determine how we're chipping away at that expense with the revenue. We don't tie them back together. Again, that's another one where these all just make it easier to read. They don't change the total. They don't change the total outcome. They just make it easier to read. And so knowing where you are at a given time and whether or not that contract that we just extended actually did get billed through and paid back is always difficult from an external point of view. So those are the things that I always grapple with, trying to know exactly where we are on expense versus it always feels bad to increase the budget and not know whether they expend and say it's okay because it's going to get paid back, and then not being able to tell whether it actually got paid back or not. So it would always be nice to be able to figure out how to deal with that.
We do a quarterly reconciliation for all of the building activity to make sure that we're drawing down out of the deposits and recognizing the revenue for all the expenses we're incurring.
Is that something we should throw
I was going to say,
into
can
this
we
as
add
well?
it to the FRC review, just to the reconciliation?
That's
I mean,
one of
it's
these
just
appendices
It
reports.
just gives you some sense of where you are, and then add it to.
It's literally a permit by permit review.
But
Utilizing our permitting system.
There's the bottom line of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, right? So
You can also look at our trust fund and see the ins and
but
outs of it.
even a paragraph in this management report that said we reconciled, this many dollars through, and here's the total.
Yeah, the reconciliation. Attachment F or whatever.
Oh yeah, but mostly you just want
Just the fact that you did it.
you did it right, and we
Just a paragraph in there.
all the stuff that we built through has been paid, or or whatever, and we're on track to balance that out. We don't have any concerns there, right? I mean, ultimately, just a paragraph in the management analysis report that says,
This is what we budgeted, this is so much we've
this is the billed through amount.
Let me see what I can do
and-
to
and-
turn
and
what
here's
she does
the
into English.
fund, and we feel like we're on. I just need to know whether in the end, what we billed through, against that, we have an expense we've already expensed, now we're billing it through, and now we're collecting money. Are we on, it's like any of the other reports, are we on track,
We can do that.
or not on track, right?
We spend a considerable amount of staff time, both in the Public Works and Community Development, and then eventually into accounting
Yeah.
to make sure that we're reimbursing ourselves.
Yeah, so all that I need is, you know, that paragraph. And also, it will give us a heads up when you're
And
gonna
doing
run
it
out.
timely.
Yeah,
It'll also give you a heads up when you're gonna run out of the contract, right? Because as you're spending that money out, you go, you know, this was a $3 million contract and we're, you know, 90% through and we're only halfway, so we're gonna have to come back in the next month to tell you we need another $3 million in here to extend this contract, or, so we can see it coming, right?
Well, and
Okay.
we've had issues on the revenue side, particularly over in this building, where we were doing work and not replenishing the deposit account. So we didn't have a trigger set that when the deposit account dropped to a certain point, hey, you gotta refill your account.
Yeah,
Because
right.
we're gonna continue to call on inspections and reviews,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, right.
well, it was,
So we've
it was
spent a
getting-
lot of time.
It was
focused
getting
on
to the
that.
point where we were gonna be telling them, we're not gonna go do an inspection without a deposit. We're now ahead of it saying, we're gonna be running out.
Yeah,
Keep your
So
deposit
you've got
account
time.
full.
right, yeah.
there's a lot
So
of work
anyway,
to do.
we don't need a lot of detail. I don't wanna make
No, it's
extra
fine.
work, right?
Let me see
But,
what I can do to take
a
what
short
she does.
detail that
Just a
says
little
we
paragraph that
reconcile
says
this out.
this is
Yeah,
where we
just,
are.
yeah, just, I mean, cause it's a revenue
I
expense
think I can do that.
analysis that's pretty quick, I think, yeah. So,
All right.
Good idea.
um,
Any other questions on Q1?
no,
That's it. Any other? Okay, it's another receive and file. That brings us to item 4, which is a pension liability update, and I think I have a conflict here. So, my wife works for the American Funds and they manage CalPERS.
Oh, good.
So, I'm not gonna be able to participate. And I'll turn it over to Paul to run the meeting. I'm out of here. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
so we'll put all of the issues back on you.
It's all gonna be my fault, I know.
We'll move on.
I'm gonna ask you other questions, but later.
Yeah, I have a few as well.
I didn't like all that last
And
time.
just, you guys are more than welcome if you wanna come in for individual briefings before, after, whatever. Just let me know.
Now, I think Mark is coming back.
Yeah.
Oh, Joe just wanted to for a minute, right?
He knows, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Okay,
He's-
so-
He's been
okay,
through this
so
with
this
me
means that-
many times.
Okay.
So this is an update. I'm not asking for action at this point in time, but kind of to start the questions. So for the past, we started this a year ago in the spring. We asked our actuary to take a look at our pension plan and to start feeding us information that we can eventually make some decisions on how to address what has become an unfunded liability. Let me go in our pension plan. So we contract with CalPERS, as do most government agencies in California. CalPERS provides pension benefits in accordance with what the state legislature has passed and allows them to offer. The city contracts with CalPERS for its pension plan. So 2 years ago, was that 2 years ago? Yeah, 2 years ago, spring, so 2.5 years ago, we had Bartel, our actuary, run our numbers in, and I will tell you that 5 years ago, we had no unfunded liability. So even after the Great Recession, I want to say it was back in 2011 or 12, we had an unfunded liability at the time. We had sufficient funds in our unassigned fund balance that we wrote an $875,000 check to CalPERS and paid off our unfunded liability. You roll forward, and CalPERS has been becoming more conservative in how they do their actuarial evaluations. So where they had been estimating long-term, I'm talking 50, 60 years out, an 8% return on funds they have that they're holding on our behalf, that they would earn 8%. They, over the last several years, have been reducing that down to a new target rate of 7%. When they reduce our projected earnings, it increases our liability because they're not planning to have as much funds on hand. At the same time, they also decided that we're all living longer, so they extended the mortality tables out, which creates pension payments at the end of somebody's life that before they weren't anticipating, which increase the liability. So when all that is said and done, when they get done ratcheting in all of their actuarial assumption changes, and there were several others as well, between inflation that impacts pension payments going forward, that there is an increase based on inflation, based on payroll growth, all kinds of different factors. We land today with what they project, and again, this is a 50-60 year projection, that the current value of our quote unfunded liability is $6 million. And that's on a $28 million total liability. If you looked way back in the back, I'll say it's on page 55, which is in the heart of the actuarial evaluation provided by PERS. There's a table down in the middle that shows retired accrued liability, total accrued liability. It's the total number I'm looking at, $28.6 million, $28,670,000. And then if you roll forward a little bit, if you roll forward to page 43, you'll see that $28 million in the top as our accrued liability, and then their valuation of our assets that they attributed to us on page 43. There you go. The table at the top, you'll see the second line. It says entry age. That's what they call how they determine our accrued liability. On the right hand side, as of June 30, 2018, their most recent valuation, we were at $28.67 million. Liability, right, the line below that is their estimated market value of our assets at 22.6, which produces the $6 million liability. That $6 million liability is actually broken into layers, if you will. That every year, they snapshot every year going backwards and say, did we earn the amount we thought we were going to earn back then? It was 8%. If we only earned 7%, it created a liability. If they changed an assumption, it either created a liability or an asset. And they have these layered, that they then take all those layers and they amortize them into payments over time. So it's a fairly complicated way of looking at things, but it's CalPERS model. So they are layering in these actuarial change losses into our annual unfunded liability payments, and you'll see that on the table down below, where they're converting. For us to pay off all of our liabilities by the early 2040s, they've got us on an amortization schedule that in 2021 has us paying $391,000, the UAL payment in that table down the middle of the table. Mm-hmm. In 2022, FY22 is $465,000, $527. You see how it goes up? It goes up and peaks in the late 2020s, somewhere around $800,000, I believe. There's actually a table in the back. So they're amortizing that into our payments. I've got it scheduled in our long-term financial plan that will make these payments. In working with our actuary and doing research and talking with CalPERS actuaries, it's our thought that what we want to do is kind of twofold. We got the city council, they approved setting aside $5 million that we now have in a separate line item in our general fund, available to invest toward reducing this long-term projected liability. And now we're at a point where we need to make some decision, what's the best way to tackle that? So an immediate option would be write a $5 million check to PERS, and it goes right to the bottom line. The council and myself and Mark and several of the actuaries don't necessarily think that's the best approach at this point in time, because you're basically subjecting that $5 million deposit to the same risks that CalPERS incurs right now to try and earn the now 7%, that we might want to take a look at investing that in a separate irrevocable trust, money that would have to go toward pension payments, but to be able to choose an investment strategy that's more conservative and maybe target a 4 or 5% return on it. But those monies would still be available to pay toward the unfunded liability. So my thought in trying to put together predictable, as predictable as we can get long-term financial plans, was to not reduce the city's annual commitment that we're making now, that's growing as you see on the schedule, but to pick a number in here that we want to kind of target and level out at, and utilize the $5 million in interest earned on it to kind of take the top off of that bell curve that will be our payments right now through 2040. The complicating factor in this, and what I'm going to talk about next, is in those layers of the annual shortfalls, if you will, that they're amortizing, that build these numbers, there might be options to pick some of those layers and actually pay them off. So put a lot of the money into a Section 115 trust that more conservatively invested to use to take the top off the bell curve, but also maybe immediately take some of that $5 million and actually pay it to PERS and tell them which of those amortizations that we want to take off, maybe some of the longer term ones. That'll help us reduce our liability. It reduces the bell curve across the spectrum, and then we use the earnings from the Section 115 to take the top off of it.
So Mike, those amortizations are on page 48.
Yeah. Yes. So you'll see the date that they were established, and it'll tell you generally what caused the delta from where they expected to be. So let me, while you're looking at that, but let me back up a second. CalPERS charges us what they call a normal cost. That if all of their assumptions are always met, this is what they think our percentage of payroll needs to be to pay them each year. If they hit all of their assumptions. Anything that misses that target, they throw into this other bucket. And right now it's an unfunded liability. It could be a surplus. So you'll see some of these bases are negatives and positives. So some of them were good and some of them weren't good. But they're always charging us a normal cost. So a normal cost that they're targeting longer term right now is about 11% of payroll. That'll be our hit. And just so you guys know, we don't participate in Social Security here. So 11% hit is, it's a lot, but it's not participating in Social Security. The city does save on that end of it. And it's still the greatest pension plan anybody could ever hope for, especially if you're in the private sector and don't have anything that's guaranteed. So we're looking to maybe pick some of these amortizations and pay them. We just purchased additional actuarial services from a company that'll let us, that's taking all of our actuarial information and dumping it into a model, and we'll be able to play with the different amortization bases, and it'll show us what the result of the payments are going to be. So we just let the contract in the last week, I believe. They'll be loading our data. Have they called you yet?
No.
Okay, they're going to be loading our data here shortly, both our current payroll data plus our PERS actuarial information. And they'll be available also to this committee when I bring forward, this is how we want to do this, that same information. So we'll be able to model it and take a look at it. It's pretty slick.
I was gonna say, it sounds like a good tool.
CalPERS built one. They've got an actuary, their chief actuary for Southern California. He built one, and I got a copy of it a couple months ago, and I played with it, and I can already see there was some pieces missing that I was having to do computations outside of it and everything, and then happened to be sitting next to the person from GovInvest, this company that's built this software model that we called them in a month or so ago, and they've got all the missing pieces, and it's very user friendly, and it's something that we can share publicly. It's interactive.
Is that why you guys upgraded payroll software?
No.
So it talks better
No.
to this?
No.
Okay.
The payroll software will allow us to do a lot of the HR related stuff that we right now have in Excel spreadsheets and files that will attract performance evaluations, and Jamie knows more about all that stuff than me. But something we've kind of had on our plate the last year and a half that we're just hopefully getting around to here shortly. Anyway, so concurrent with us getting this new model up and running to be able to play with, we're also still getting more information from CalPERS, who has a Section 115 trust, which is separate from their current investments. where they will have an investment strategy, a couple of choices that are more conservative than what they do now. And there's a cost to it, but the cost is, I'm going to tell you, it's going to be a lot less than what we would get from private sector. And there's a couple of other private sectors that we're taking a look at. I'm hoping I can get out of the office next Wednesday to go up to Torrance to see a presentation from PARS, which is one of the providers.
So you are going to that?
I'm going to try. I got to get out of a couple things, but anyway, I'm really waiting for CalPERS. They've got a couple of agencies that have invested money in the Section 115 trust. I do trust CalPERS, and they have a history regarding, they've got another Section 115 trust regarding post-retirement healthcare benefits, where over 500 agencies have invested billions of dollars over the last 12 years, and they've got a good track record of being able to hit their targets. And the cost of them managing that is like 12 basis points, so it's de minimis compared to what we might be paying upwards of 50 basis points.
This is the same company you were talking about at the last FRC?
PARS is one of the private providers. At the last FRC, I mentioned that state law just changed that allowed CalPERS to create a pension Section 115 trust. That went into effect January. They got it up and running, I believe, July, August. And I'm waiting for them to get enough agencies with enough dollars in there
That was going to be my next
to know that
question.
it's one viable. They've got several lined up, but I would like to see them have $100 billion from
Someone
agencies
else's
invested.
money.
Yeah, that's also going to help offset the administrative costs. So they've already come out of the gate and said our administrative costs, I know they're more than 25 basis points, but right out of the gate they're saying it's 25 basis points, and the state's given them money to subsidize their costs while they get this up and running. I'm very confident that they're going to get them down to that same basis points when they get their deposits up. Again, they've got 12 years of experience. They saw the same thing that everybody else saw when the Great Recession hit. They did, because they came out of the gate like in 2007, and so 2008 and into 9, they took it. All those people that made deposits at that point in time, it was a bloodbath. But they've performed very consistently, slightly better than their target returns. And honestly, with our small staff, not having to manage a private company and what they're doing, I would lean more toward PERS than just from an administrative point too. That we already have a relationship, we already make deposits with them, we already understand their systems and reports, and I don't have to have a money manager looking at it, somebody who knows what they're doing. So anyway, so we're still working on it. We'll be bringing back more information. I kind of targeted near the end of this fiscal year to hopefully make a decision and bring something to council following input from the FRC. But again, we're still looking at it. So.
Can I have a quick question on page 48 of the chart? So it has an amortization period, it says?
Yep.
And it's just a number, right, from something to 30. Is that the
Number of years that they're amortized, that are remaining in the
okay,
amortization.
that's what I assumed it was, but
So one of the other things they changed in the last couple of years is they shortened the amortizations. So if they had a loss in a year where they used to amortize it over 30 years, they're amortizing over 20, which increases your current costs.
Yeah.
So they're trying to get more money in sooner.
So that really are the things that if we decide to pay one of those off, that
We probably wouldn't pay the shorter
I was going to
amortizations
say it would
off.
be the longer
It
ones.
would be
right?
the longer ones.
Yeah,
And
that's really-
it looks intuitive, but there's some things you want to take into account.
So for example, we'll be able to play with options to say, if you look down to the first assumption change, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you see that our balance as of 6/30/20 will be $1,079,301. And if we pay that off, we would have eliminated $102,630 in a payment, right? We will reduce our annual payment by that amount.
Yeah.
So the question is, if you take down that piece,
But
what does that do to your overall,
it
20-year
changes the
plan?
height of the bell curve.
Right. And so which ones of those peak the curve the most that do we want to look at chopping off so that we can normalize our costs going out, right?
And I'm
So
also,
this software will give us the
Yeah.
ability to look at these sort of one by one to see what they do, right?
yes. So, and CalPERS still allows you to pick which amortization basis to pay off you want to spend the money. I don't want to say they're always going to do that, but right now they are allowing it.
Do these other companies allow that?
Separate the 115 trust from our CalPERS. These are our payments we're going to make to CalPERS, whether they come from the city's general fund or whether they come out of our Section 115 trust, or a combination of the two, which is really what I'm looking for. I'm actually looking to we might pay off some amortization basis and lower the overall bell curve, but I'm probably going to be recommending that the bell curve, where we're at on it right now, that we allow it to increase in our payments so that the money we put in the 115 trust can actually earn some interest before we start using some of it to keep the top off of this thing.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the idea is whatever we put in a deposit, let's let it sit there, grow the principal over a couple of years so that at least we've preserved that principal, and then start using those investment returns on top of the principal to cut off the top of those payments.
Gotcha.
And normalize them over time.
So, and one thing that will be odd to possibly hear for the first time, but in talking with a lot of the actuaries, you may not want to pay off your entire unfunded liability because you can't predict what's gonna happen with them. So literally, I could give them the whole $6 million today, and they could have 5 banner years in a row, and you overpaid. So it feels good to pay off all your debts. They'll
From a balance
hear,
sheet perspective,
Yeah.
when you put the money in the 115, you've committed it.
I get to talk about it, hopefully, or
Right.
auditors allow us to talk about it in footnotes, but we still have the unfunded liability on our balance sheet.
Right.
Yeah, but you have the ability to, you haven't committed to how you use it in terms of paying pension, right? So you could literally pay premiums out of it.
Yes,
et cetera,
it has to
as
go toward
opposed to-
pensions,
right.
but it doesn't
If you
mean that
didn't
you
need
can't
it.
supplant your current plan. So if
Right.
everything went to hell in a handbasket and I needed to take $500,000 out of it to make this year's payment, I'm allowed to do that.
Right, exactly. So it gives us a lot more flexibility.
I can do that for 1 year, and then there has to be a 1 year hiatus. That's what some of the IRS rules won't allow you to make 2 full years of payments out of it.
Well, hopefully I'll never make any.
Ever.
It'd be nice.
Right, no, but
It'd be
it's
nice
still,
to
it's always
have that
nice to
option
have,
if it came to it.
it's always
right?
nice to have something to,
Yeah.
in your back pocket if you need it. So a good funded plan, you'll often hear, and people scratch their head, is 90 to 93% is a well-funded plan. We can all debate that, but targeting the 100%, you may be overpaying. We're talking about 50 to 60 year projections.
Right.
For the full life of our youngest employee until the amortization table or the mortality
The other
table
thing
says
we'll
they
be
pay.
able to test, and again, we'll put it up on this screen so we can look at different options, is I pointed out the assumption change. So CalPERS probably will change their investment rate of return assumption again. So they've gone from,
8 to
were they at
7.
8
Sure,
to
yeah.
7 3/4 to 7.5, 7 1/4, now they're at 7. There's pretty widely held belief that they're going to get to 6. So we'll have the ability to plug those rates into this system. I saw a demo of it at ICMA, that's why I know. And in different years, so you can say, okay, we think in 2025 they're going to go to 6. So we can plug that in, make that assumption,
See
and
what
figure
happens
out
every day.
what we're doing from there.
So it'll be an ongoing discussion for decades.
But this fiscal year is the year we want to actually start the trust. So we've got the money set aside, so we want to get moving on it.
Well, and then we need to, ultimately here we'll need to set the goal, right? Literally if we decide that, 500,000 is the number that we can just budget forever, and then how do we start when we, the first year that we go above it, just pay the delta that brings, the down to 500 and next year down to 500 or whatever that number is, and we have to figure out what that number is that works, right?
And there's nothing preventing us from putting additional deposits in the Section 115 trust.
Right.
So if we have surpluses and we're looking for the best thing to do for them, and we're still trying to tackle the top of that bell curve.
Well, you can figure out the return on your investment by paying it down. I mean, basically, just like you would on any asset, if you leave the money and you're going to earn something on it, or you pay something down and you're going to reduce an expense off of it, you can figure out the return and decide that's a better investment than.
So some of the good news, if there is, with defined benefit pension plans, when you're an employer and you're on the hook for those payments and guaranteeing them, is that in 2013 the state passed legislation that all new participants in CalPERS starting January 1, 2013 are put into a lower pension plan that we now have or over a third of our workforce in, just in the last 6 years. And in that pension plan, employees are on the hook to pay for half the cost until they retire, and then the city's still on the hook post-retirement. So it's not a free ride altogether, but we're right now under they call it the classic plan. Employees are on the hook for the employer portion, which was capped at 7%, and the city's on the hook for whatever the delta is to make the full normal cost payment and the unfunded liability. For you two, the city council and the labor group here at Dana Point agreed that all employees would start paying into that unfunded liability payment, started January 1 of this year, with a 0.5% of payroll. So everybody gets a 0.5% of payroll taken out. It helps us make these payments. July 1 next year, it goes to 1.25%, and then July 1 in 2021 it goes to 2%. So they are contributing to this. So we've taken positive steps in a couple of different areas, but the biggest positive step for our long term is the conversion of employees to the lower pension plan, and that'll help us with that bell curve as well. So that's what I got right now.
When you said the 93%, what?
Oh.
This is dumb. Tell me what numbers I should be using in that ratio on this sheet. Is it 28 and?
I'll show you. It's actually
1?
in here. I think it's on the
Okay.
first page, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I didn't quite read all the way back here.
We are.
You just
I'll
called
give
me
you-
out.
I'll give you a page number. Hang on.
It's on the first page.
No, it's not.
Thanks for making me feel bad.
It is.
Well, yeah, even if you read it, you had to know you were looking
No,
for it.
it was on.
You read
It was on
right?
page 43.
Oh, I got
42
I got to
pages
42.
You're only on 24. You can grab more pages.
Okay.
So you'll see at the bottom of the table.
Oh, but haven't we, in theory, we've set aside 5 million? So is
It's
that
not
still,
shown in there.
okay? But realistically, for us, isn't it fair to include? So it's really
You're talking about real dollars we have in the bank versus 50 to 60 year projections. So yeah, you can put the two together and say, yes,
They're kind of similar.
they're kind of similar, but when you're dealing with actuarial projections,
But to say we're only at 78.8 is way too low, considering we just put 5 million
but
aside.
we've got the 5 million in
But it
an
hasn't
account where we
funded
can,
it.
that the city council can make a decision on any Tuesday night to spend on anything they want.
Oh,
That's
okay.
government.
Until such time as we put it in
In
the
the-
115.
Okay,
Which
okay.
we will do this fiscal year.
Which would then bump us to your 93, which is
On
in theory.
paper,
On
but,
paper,
but
yeah.
they won't let me put it on the balance sheet.
Yeah, that's okay.
But you
we're
can
the
ask her,
group
so-
who will try to figure out where we are on paper, right?
Right.
I mean, that's
Well,
our, not the,
We'll work on the auditors. If they don't allow us to put it in the footnotes, we'll put it in our management discussion.
that's what I mean. Then you can go into management discussion or whatever, where we are based on that and what we project, all set. Mostly though, the scary part is that every year you can see that number of
You
what
know
we
it's
owe
there.
going up, right?
Yeah, you know it's there.
And depending on how they do it now, it's capping out at 900-ish K or something like that. But if they
Yeah.
if they crank that number down another 0.25%, it'll be $1 million, right? And
Yep.
then it'll whatever. And so taking $1 million out of the budget every year versus the 400,000 that we have this year, 390, I think, right? I mean, that's a big hit. So if you can now prepare to offset it, to say, okay, we can let that creep up to, you know, some number, but then it's gotta, you know, it can't just keep creeping for the next one.
Well, and hopefully if they do crank it down, their chances of hitting their targets are gonna get better, and you're not gonna have going forward, you know, you hopefully
misses.
stop the bleed.
Yeah,
And then you just gotta, you know, fix the patient, but.
yeah. I understood. I understand why they're
I
breaking
hit,
it down. Was
so-
good. 8% was,
what's Carrie's last name, the actual?
Morgan?
Carrie Morgan.
Morgan.
So he said something at the last presentation I went to that actuaries, I'm sorry, I know it's on the record, but they hurt my head. But he actually said something that even though they barely missed their target this last year, that they actually did better based on inflation and other factors they have in their model that we don't see.
Yeah, right.
And I'm just like, why don't you just give us? Anyway, so he said they hit their number actually, but you just don't see it on paper.
Discount for inflation, essentially.
Yeah.
That's what he was saying. Which,
yeah. Well, which is part of their model, right? So, anyway, but yeah, it doesn't work out that.
So they tell me we have a liability and I have to go with it. So
Okay.
that's all I have.
So the bottom line is, Mike's gonna come forward with a couple of different proposals, ideas for how to tame this beast, not slay it, because we're not gonna slay it, we're gonna tame it. We'll be able to look at the models and what they do at least 20 years out, and the council's gonna look for the FRC's recommendation on sort of which road to go down.
How to use the money.
Yes, how to use
$5
the-
million that are set there, what to do with it, and or what we should do in this regard, right? So should we put it in all in trust? Should we pick a couple of the line items off of this where, you know, this list of things and pay them off and put the rest in the trust? Should we, you know, target to bring, to spend some and then bring that trust level back up to some number? I mean, what should we do? Basically, that's where, as we go through this, we'll try to get to the point where we can go back and say, this is,
Makes sense.
kick stuff around and this is.
But don't we also, in theory, have to take into account the direction of our city on the revenue side? I mean, we're putting in tons of hotels. Maybe a bell curve that goes up isn't that bad. I'm not right. I mean, it's as long as we're able to meet those obligations. I don't know if we need to pay for something now, but
That might be then a good thing to do, Mike, before we go into the next presentation, is just refresh the long-term financial plan.
Yeah, so
Because we can look 7 years out, get a sense for,
Fairly
what those
detailed
projections are.
discussion in the back of the budget on the long-term financial plan that talks about our major revenues and major expenditures and risks. And the unfunded liability is a big part of that discussion.
but maybe we start there and then
Yeah.
move into the unfunded liability piece, to your point, Mike, about
So
looking at what we think the future is gonna look like. Would.
So we can
Take
add
those things into account.
long-term
Yeah.
financial.
Well,
plan.
yeah, I mean, basically, you're gonna deal with,
To the next agenda.
if none of our expense
say
lines
update, though.
increase any
Just
faster
discussion.
than our revenue line, then you could basically just look at how they, basically the revenue line, with growth will be, 1.5% a year or whatever, and inflation expenses and whatever, or 1.5%, you can hold even, right? And then you can look at what this does and say, well, what's the percentage increase in year to year? But we have to look at it. Right now, we have some expenses that are increasing significantly faster than our revenue line. The police services costs being, the huge driver of that, and then that's the bigger one. And then with the unfunded liability, then the employee personnel cost being the second, and you bring that back in, right? So just figuring out where the money goes to make it so that we can deal with that. And then so I mean, there's a couple of things that we just have to. I mean, this is one of the two most significant problems for us to figure out how to get it out in front of, right? And the cost of police services, and the other, we'll have to eventually figure out how to get out in front of, because it's going up. And contract just getting signed by the county, so it's gonna really shoot up, so.
So are there any other questions on the pension?
So I
So,
think that's all we
So-
have on it.
so-
Anything else? So this is a receive and file, so.
Yep.
and then, what's the next agenda? Just make sure I don't wander off the resolution.
That was the last
Staff
item.
reports.
Oh, staff reports, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's the last item there.
So, to adjourn to the next date,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Either Monday, January 27th, or Tuesday, January 28th.
January 27th or 28th, is that?
the FRC decided to meet the end of the month following the end of the quarter.
Okay.
So we'll be looking at the end of January. I fly out on vacation January 29th, right?
Wednesday.
I will just try to load you up with a bunch of to-dos. This has to be done tomorrow.
Well, either one of those, obviously, for most people, yeah, probably okay, unless you happen to have a vacation plan. I would recommend the 28th if we can do it, but
So
Pretty hard.
Jamie will send around a note, just making sure everybody's good with it.
Okay.
Same time?
We'll s-
3 o'clock,
Okay.
great.
So, it's fine.
Like, does 3 work for you?
Talking to me?
Yeah?
Yes, I mean, it's like 4 months away, yes.
Okay.
Actually, I'm glad it's not the 27th. So,
So Jamie, let's throw out all 4 dates for next year. So let's just, whatever that is, the fourth Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and see what that looks like, and get it out to everybody, so that we can at least, that way we don't ever have to think about scheduling again. It's the bane of my existence.
Oh, man, I can imagine.
Yeah, painful.
we could probably send out the budget calendar also, so they have the budget calendar.
Oh, right.
yes.
Some milestones on there. Alright.
Okay,
We good?
Adjourn.
yeah, I think we're good. I think we are adjourned until January the 28th, 3 p.m.
4:17, all right. Now let's go get an agenda.
Oh shit, that's right.